Rahim is the author of over 15 books and an investor. So let's welcome him up on the stage.
Good afternoon, Prague. It's an amazing conference, but it's exhausting, right? So I appreciate anyone still being left in the audience and not dozing off. I have to start with a disappointment. I got myself a last-minute excuse not to finish my slides. And of course, you'll wonder now, a guy talking about investment, and he hasn't even brought a pitch deck. How am I peddling my wares or shares or coins? I mean, is this guy even serious? Because you know, of course, investment is a dead serious business. It's a suits and ties business. I've had many keynote speeches at investment conferences over the years, and until very recently, I was never asked to speak about Bitcoin, because of course, Bitcoin has always been considered this small, irrelevant pyramid scheme. And real investment is only about big and relevant pyramid schemes, of course. And I was told to keep it practical, so I'll start up with the secret recipe for successful investing. So write down the note. You have to buy what everyone else is buying before everyone else has bought it. Secret recipe of successful investing. And there, of course, you see why it's that serious. It's a war of every man against every man, competitively buying assets. And I think the appeal of the fiat system potentially is softening a bit that war and by concealing it. But of course, on the other side, of course, it drives almost everyone into that kind of speculative frenzy. There's nothing bad about speculation. Speculation is a skill, it's an enterprise done by people who bring in liquidity or access to liquidity as their capital. But as with everything, if everyone is pushed into speculation, as if everyone is pushed into university or everyone is pushed onto TikTok and so on, it has quite some serious misallocation as a result. So what do people actually try to do when they think they are investing? Most people try to do something very natural, which interestingly has been considered by almost every economic school to be entirely unnatural, very artificial, even a character flaw, and that's saving in the form of hoarding, the hodling. Now, why would people rather prefer to hodl? Because we all age, we are getting older, our capacity to generate income may go down, but our need to spend money may go up. And of course, if we are aware of that, we try to time our purchase decisions a little bit. And it's only the Austrian School of Economics that really appreciates that aspect, that appreciates that it's a kind of natural intuition of people to go for that. And it appreciates that money, of course, there is a very important tool. It's a tool to help us focus life energy on particular points in space and in particular points in time as well, so that we can maximize the potential for cooperation and to get the highest value at the points and times when we think we'll get the highest value out of that. But a major reason why hoarding has such a negative connotation is, of course, that it is not investing. So don't let yourself be fooled by that. There's nothing bad about hoarding, but it's not investing. And so most people would consider, well, if everyone was just hoarding, who would be investing? And I try to address that a little bit, what investing actually means. So according to the Austrian school, there's a second part of saving that's called investive saving. And investive saving is turning the most liquid good money into a less liquid good, that is capital or capital goods, and there, of course, you carry the burden of uncertainty. And it only makes sense to do that if you can get undervalued goods, you see a potential future Well, they generate a higher value, and getting something that's undervalued means you have to see things that other people are not seeing, and that's the essence of entrepreneurship, and that's a very, very important gift in society, but it has a big problem. What's the problem? If you see things that other people are not seeing and you hear things that other people are not hearing, there's a very small chance that you're really a mentalist. There's a much higher probability you're mental, means you're clinically insane. And due to uncertainty, there is no way to distinguish a future successful entrepreneur and investor from a clinically insane person at the moment. So most people would think, okay, the safe way is to lock them all up, regulate them all out of existence, just to play safe. Of course, that'd be a terrible decision to do because of the outsized importance of investing. What Ludwig von Mises had called entrepreneurship in a narrow sense, he called it promotion. He meant a very active process of moving forward, of shaping a new and better future, given the means that are available, the productive resources that are available. But of course, the risk is very high that you use resources in the wrong way, you waste it, so investment should not be something that's done in a light-hearted fashion. So what can you do if you can't distinguish the clinically insane from the potentially really important capital allocators of the future? Is you want to have a kind of discipline imposed on really having the people with the best chances make investments. And I think there's where Bitcoin potentially comes in, because I mean, it's the strongest discipline any investor has ever faced on the planet. You've got to beat Bitcoin if you're investing Bitcoin, which is terribly difficult, and most will fail. So it looks like, oh my God, I mean, who would be crazy enough to risk that? I think it's a good heuristic, someone who thinks that he'll be able to. I think that's the right kind of craziness. Usually it'll go wrong. What can help you make sure that it doesn't go wrong too much? I think it's good to have the discipline, because if too many people try to do investment because they want to just do saving, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing. We still tell a fairy tale to our kids of the piggy bank, and which has very little to do with reality, even less than Santa Claus, because at least he was a real saint, while on the piggy bank there's no saving happening there, of course. So I think it's good to have that discipline. And what would you naturally do? You would not start out investing. I think you would start to try figure out how can you create value for someone else. So if you're not starting out as a capitalist, I think you should start out as a worker. And I think what is very interesting is that the fiat finance has an end result that's very similar to socialism. No one wants to do the freaking work anymore. And it's either fiat subsidies or it's fiat returns. It's like the idea of passive income. I don't want to have to do anything. I just pick the right coin, and then I don't have to work anymore, kind of idea. And I think that's not a good advice for investing. So if you cannot create value for someone else, I think the first thing is you'll invest in yourself. You try to improve yourself to be able to provide value for someone. And then if you figure that out, of course, the chance is highest that you are able to leverage that what you're doing. So you'd invest in your own company. That's the most natural form of investment. So I think if we'd had more of a discipline of a sound money, more businesses would be cash flow financed and come out of reinvesting returns. If that is done, still investing is very important, but the odds are quite bad. So you don't need that many people specializing in carrying the burden of uncertainty that exceeds their own existential uncertainty already. For most people, it's just too much to carry. It's great that there are people, it's great they should specialize in that kind of investment. Why would they invest if they are really serious, if they are seeing things that are undervalued? Why would they risk turning potentially Bitcoin into capital goods and go for uncertain returns. And I think there are two concepts from the Austrian school that help us explain how that could happen. The first one is time preference. If you look at people with a very low time preference, it may look like the immediate return is not that important. It's future returns that become more and more important. And if you have a very low time preference, a very long time horizon, a commercial venture may even look like a philanthropic endeavor. If you plant a forest now, and it'll be your children or the children of your children reaping the benefits of it, still I think it's an economically sound decision, even though it does not have to outperform Bitcoin during your lifetime, but it may provide very long-term returns. There's nothing wrong about money returns, money profits. Out of the perspective of the Austrian school, the subjectivist one, is that they are usually not an end in themselves. They're a means. They are the best and most honest means to support a business, to grow a business, but they don't have to be the end in themselves. And subjectivism means people can have lots of preferences, and they can have different preferences, and they can prefer immaterial returns as well. So of course you may look at ventures and investing in ventures and uncertain ventures, even though the monetary return is below what you'd expect the further monetization of Bitcoin to deliver in fiat terms, and still prefer the immaterial return of what you're investing in. And I think we can learn from history where there are some very surprising immaterial returns. At first, we know from history that the wealthiest parts on the planet with the soundest money in history always produce the highest forms of culture. And of course, it's a very high form of culture if you have the low time preference, potential immaterial returns of leaving a legacy to the planet. But on the other hand, if we look at what were the real first ventures, what were the first companies created, who did that? And there you realize, wow, the term venture actually comes from the merchant adventurers. The merchant adventurers. Adventure is the same word as venture. What were the first companies that merchant adventurers invested in as joint ventures? They were the joint adventures of ships. Merchant adventurers would have a portfolio of ships. And every ship, of course, is a capital good or a combination of capital goods. It makes sense to pool resources, but every ship was a ticket to adventure, and really the craziest and most fun kind of adventure you can imagine. So I think it's a very good reason to go for joint ventures with other adventurers, just for the reason that it's an adventure. It's something uncertain. It may be worthwhile in itself what you discover along the way, what you learn along the way, the fun you have along the way, creating something potentially even superior to a Bitcoin return. But that's not the point. It's just you risk that, board the ships, sail into the unknown kind of adventure. And now there's something very practical and very paradoxical. If we look at like very long-term advice, if you can talk to your great-grandparent and give them investment advice and figure out how would they have managed to pass on some wealth on to me, and most of us, we haven't gotten any from our great-grandparents, zero left, and it's not about which altcoin your great-grandparent picked and which he did not. Of course, it was another kind of uncertainty. It was a very artificial kind of uncertainty. It's regime uncertainty. It's actually that we don't just have a business cycle of capital misallocation all the time because people are misled into believing that they are investing. They aren't actually investing. They are running for these pyramid scheme-like things. But there is another cycle going on. And it's a cycle of violence, unfortunately. And it's a cycle of an inflated sense of certainty. So a lot of our ancestors lived through times where they had an inflated sense of certainty. They thought that everything will be fine. They just keep on repeating what their parents did. And then suddenly, a very bad surprise happens. And why during the time of an inflated sense of certainty, you would think, oh, it's crazy to go on a merchant ship. I mean, it's the worst thing you can do. Who would go on a ship? I mean, sailing in the unknown, the risk is so high that you'll never make it back. In those times of correction, of cyclical correction, the safest place to be on is a merchant ship that has left the harbor. And if your great-grandparent was on a merchant ship, then probably you're very lucky that some legacy has been left onto you. And then I think very interesting, so if you look at the cyclical pattern, it's not so much our little like tiny allocation decisions. It's sometimes the safest investment and safest bet is the craziest one, is the big kind of adventure. So let me finish with some practical advice now for you Bitcoiners. I think the greatest risk for Bitcoiners, of course, is not FOMO, it's ROMO. It's the regret of having missed out, because, of course, we could have, oh my God, have I bought too little Bitcoin? Yes, of course. So if in doubt, don't worry about that. It's all sunk costs. Forget about it. If in doubt, stack sats. Be happy that there's that really easy opportunity. It's not everything. But if you sense that there is something that's not just the thrill of gambling or a status game, but it's actually a promise of adventure and the promise of a better future, I think it's a good idea to sometimes choose life and even let go and risk some of your Bitcoins in those fun and risky ventures. So I don't have any worries that there'll be too little investment in the future. I think as long as there are living people and with less distortion around them, we'll still board ships into the unknown, and we'll be much more disciplined and much more focused in doing that. So I'm quite optimistic that the real meaning of venture and venture capital and investment may finally come back just by having the mirror and the discipline of that potential easy Bitcoin hoarding, saving route that is there. Of course, it won't fix everything. It's just like unload the burden in your mind and have some free room in considering the potentially interesting ventures happening. And I invite you all along these journeys and adventures into the unknown. Thanks a lot.